Welcome down to my 9-foot homemade oak bar. Pour yourself a cold one. You are listening to Bucs in the Basement. My name's Chris, and Craig here is the biggest Pirates fan you'll ever meet. Let's talk Pirates baseball now. Welcome to Bucs in the Basement.
Now I see the changes in this town. They change, they say one thing, but then the next day it's different. They change, but they don't know what they want. All they do is change. Going left, going right, travel day, travel night. That's where we'll go. No excuses, no goodbyes, no one cries, no one lies. We'll never know.
I'm getting better at hitting all the buttons I forgot to hit before we started the show during the intro music. You know, recording and the important things about putting a podcast together, recording the podcast. I was like, whoops, I didn't even open up the program. I got the whole thing done during the intro music. That's amazing. Bucs in the Basement. My name's Chris. He's Craig. I'm imagining we're going to talk about Gary Sanchez. I'm imagining we're going to talk about PECOTA Projections. And I'm imagining we're going to talk about how the Royals can afford a nearly $300 million contract and Bob Nutting throws around nickels like they're manhole covers. So which one do you want to get into first, my friend?
I mean, it's got to be the first, the last one you mentioned. So the first one on the bottom of our screen here is I don't know. I think everybody has the instant reaction and, people put out the hot take of, the Pirates can't spend like the big market Royals. And, ha, ha, ha.
I love that, though. I love it. You have every right to be that way. You have every right as a fan to be that way. I know that somebody's going to be like, oh, well, let's be reasonable and every situation is different. But come on now. These guys are all billionaires that own these teams. Did you see what the Orioles sold for? Give me a break. We talk about it all the time in Forbes magazine. Jerry Reinsdorf, whose own fan base in Chicago thinks he's cheap, was rated in Forbes magazine right next to Bob Nutting, who spends, a third of what the White Sox spend every year? And he's got the same amount of money? He's got a ticket to the magical island of billionaires where they hunt the most dangerous game? Give me a break. They all got their own aircraft. It's funny to me when Major League Baseball owners cry poor, but what they're really crying is cheap. They're really crying greed. They're really crying, I have this plaything, but I don't want to spend the money on it. And they're never going to spend the money they have. And that's the thing. That's what's so funny about this. You see a number like, $1.25 billion a team being sold for. That money will never be spent by the people that just made it. You couldn't spend $1 billion if you spent every waking moment of your life trying to spend it. It's like Brewster's Millions, remember? He had millions. And every time he spent it, he kept making money inadvertently. You can't get rid of $1 billion. And so, to me, when you think about $1 billion too, right? Spending an extra $50 million on your payroll and just taking that out of your bank account and operating at a loss, you're not even denting your billion or your $4 billion that you're worth. You're not even denting it, right? And so it's funny, you get small business owners that'll sit there and scrape together every dime that they have, go out and get a loan, and start something and hope that it works out because you got to spend money to make money. These guys have so much money, they could spend money, build a champion, and then all of a sudden be the darling of their geographical area, have brand new stadiums built, statues everywhere, be beloved by people all around, and they'd make back that investment within the next 5 to 10 years and more. And they're so cheap holding on to their billions of dollars that some of them won't do it. So I think the criticism is completely warranted because the criticism was warranted when Royals fans were mad at the Royals for being one of the few teams that had never spent more than $100 million on a ball player. Because up until then, they had never given out a contract that totaled more than $100 million. Now the only two teams left on that list, surprisingly, are the White Sox and the A's. I mean, I saw that stat and I was like, really? Like, that's crazy to me. But that's the reality. So I think fan bases that get mad at their ownership, including Pirates fans, have every right to make that comparison. Because it's a joke that these billionaires will cry poor and keep the cost down. And to be honest with you, I believe it's all collusion. I believe a certain group of billionaires keep the cost down because if they all raise their prices, then teams like the Yankees and Dodgers would have to spend $800 million on a payroll very soon. They need the cheap owners to keep everybody in check. It's all part of a system that probably they come up with inside of some room that's really nice looking, but buried under the ground 3 miles deep. And they go down there and they hide and they plot. That's what I believe.
Okay, well, I'm gonna lick some boots here for a second, according to a bunch of people, but I'm gonna
Yeah,
take
lick some boots, you bootlicker.
I'm gonna take the opposite thing here because number one, I mean, Ken Rosenthal came out with an article and just basically said this isn't an outlier. This isn't because of the new stadium, and there was like another reason, and he's just like, if you think this, you're wrong. And people are like, oh man, Ken Rosenthal. And I'm like, oh, you mean Ken Rosenthal, the guy that carries water for every single agent and every single like and the
Right.
MLBPA
He
like
makes his
constantly?
money. He makes his money essentially working for MLB and all the agents. They don't pay him directly, but he does get a trickle down effect. Trust me. He has benefited greatly by being a friend.
Okay, and number two, the second thing here is the structuring of this deal. You can put this giant number out there and basically wow people. So what is it? 11 years, $288 million, and then they talk about like the club options that it could go up to just an absolute ridiculous amount of money. Number one, Bobby Witt Jr. this year is going to make $2 million. Next year, he's going to make $7 million. 2026, $13 million. 2027, he is making $19 million. So it's not even until 2028 that a lot of this even kicks in. And two things for me here. The one big thing that sticks out for me is, Chris, when does this CBA expire? This current CBA?
I don't remember. Why you hit me with questions like that?
Okay, it expires midnight, December 31st, 2006. So when it kicks in to the
I mean
$19 million,
2026.
yeah.
Yeah.
So, but midnight, December 26th, 2000. So basically, when it turns to 2027, you're gonna have to
2027.
restructure all of that. For me, it was just like, okay, it doesn't really start hitting the big money when I believe that we are going to have either a lockout or a new CBA that comes in. When you see teams like the Boston Red Sox, cutting their payroll, you see teams frustrated like the Toronto Blue Jays, who were, foiled by the mighty Dodgers for to Shohei Ohtani. You see the Cubs, who, I mean, I think they will go out and spend a decent amount of money, but you see them not spending as much money. You see I think it was the Yankees over the past couple years have been basically trading players to dip below a lot of that stuff. So you have the Dodgers and you have Cohen, who's just a recluse, who's going to spend like I would spend if I owned the Pirates and had that much money. And everybody else is kind of cutting costs. So it just kind of it was interesting to me that once things would actually start to kick into a lot of money, that's when I believe there will be some increased revenue sharing, different stuff, type of stuff like this. Yes, these contracts will be guaranteed and grandfathered in, but there will be more revenue sharing at that point in time. So in essence, to me, this is a 7-year, $148 million contract, which is still a big contract, but it's nowhere near like the amount that everybody makes it out to be, that the Royals just
Yeah, but
basically hit it.
you're putting an awful lot of what ifs in there. You don't know how the negotiations will go when they get to their CBA. You don't have any idea how Bobby Witt Jr. is going to perform, right? Like
Yeah.
he can opt out, but what if Bobby Witt Jr. falls on his face, or what if he suffers an Achilles injury in 2030? And he's like, well, I'm not opting out for the next 4 years. And it really does turn into all that money. And he actually only plays for 7 and he makes $288 million. That's a lot of what ifs, right? Like you're trying to give the Royals the ability to see into the future and then sign a deal that somehow they're going to make out on. They're on the hook for 288 unless
Well,
Bobby Witt Jr. thinks he can get more than $35 million a year in his age 31, 32, 33, and 34 seasons. You don't even know where he's going to be at that point.
Well, a piece of
So
this, Chris, is injury would be an out for both of them because 99% of these contracts are insured based on injury. It's not based on performance. So if a
okay,
guy
take
gets
away
injured,
injury. Take away injury. He turns into Cody Bellinger. Take away injury, and he forgets how to hit all of a sudden.
okay,
Right? I mean, like, there's plenty of ball players that get hot and then fall off. There's a lot of guys that don't make it all the way until their mid 30s performing at a high average. And that's the thing. Your prime years are when you're 26, 27, 28 years old.
yes.
General decline begins at 29 and 30. So you think that when his salary's going up and his skills are declining, he'll get more than 35 million a year and opt out?
I mean, depending on, I mean, we've seen, like, dude, with inflation, a contract that
I
that 7
If
years from
inflation
now,
gets if inflation gets that bad, I'm getting into bank robbing because I can't keep up. Honestly, I mean, like, I mean, I get what you're saying. I get what you're saying is like, hey, these look like big gaudy numbers, but you don't know what baseball players are going to be getting paid in 10 years. Okay, I
yeah.
get that, right? I get that, but man, I that seems to me like what you're trying to say is that you think that the average Major League Baseball player is going to see double the salary in the next 7 years across the board for those numbers to make sense.
Well,
I just
I don't
don't
know
get
if
it.
I don't know if it'll double, but I think that like a player of his caliber could make like I don't know $45 million.
45 million a year. You think he'd be worth that? Oh my gosh. I just
Well,
can't
I'm
imagine.
just saying certain players. I'm just saying certain players would make 45 million, where 35 million wouldn't look as bad.
All right.
But I mean, so this I know there's a lot of what ifs in there and a lot of different stuff. I honestly don't believe that the Royals are going to be paying for much beyond probably like 2028, 2029 once it gets up into the 30
Well,
million
I
dollar
mean,
range.
based upon your economic outlook for Major League Baseball, as soon as this podcast is over, I'm going to go upstairs. I'm pulling my 8-year old out of school, and I'm hiring him a personal trainer, and he's only going to take ground balls and work on his swing. And in the evenings, he'll work on basic pitching. I don't want to get him his first Tommy John until he's at least 22, 23 years old.
Was is he
And he's
left
going to be
hand?
as dumb as
Is he
he's going to
left
be as
handed?
dumb as a box of rocks, but he is going to make some money in life.
Is he a lefty or is he a righty?
He's a righty, but I'll tie his arm behind his back. I think we can retrain him.
Okay, as I say, I got
Because based upon your economics, I'm stupid not to do that right now. Like,
yeah.
I mean, he might have to go to therapy for the way that his dad changed his childhood and basically made him start working at the age of 8 years old. But he can afford the therapist with all that money
Yeah.
that you're giving out in 7, 8, 9 years. Because by the time he's 18 years old, 10 years from now, by your math, he's going to come out to a minimum salary of like $8 million a year.
Yeah, I mean, and we will see like what contracts look like. I mean, I think that he's a younger version of what I'm talking about, but we'll see how much Juan Soto gets next year and where the contracts go up and how and obviously how they'll be structured as well, with kind of Otani kind of throwing that to the wolves. But I mean, my last point and the last boot that I will lick today is it is very funny that this contract comes out at this point in time when in about I believe 18 days there is going to be a vote on the Kansas City Royals getting a new stadium, asking for half of the $2 billion that they believe is going to be necessary to build the stadium downtown, and that they make this sort of move. To me, it's like, and here's the thing: is we've had David Sampson on before, and as much as people will, criticize David Sampson for his job and the nepotism of him even being with the Marlins and different stuff like that, the guy has sat in the room. The guy has been in these types of conversations, and he basically said, "This is page 2 of the I need a new stadium playbook." Is to sign a player to a contract for an ungodly amount of money and to backload it. I mean, if this would have been, say, if it would have been a 7 year, $148 million deal, or just even say $140 million, and it was $20 million a year, it may look a little bit different. But the way that this is structured is that it's just basically like, as we, get our new stadium, because a lot of other people are saying, well, Sherman, who's the owner of the Royals, well, he's only been the owner of the Royals for the past, I think it's since 2019, 2020. Came in, gave Salvador Perez a little bit of a bump. He got an extension that was the largest before this, didn't top 100 million, but for a 31-year-old catcher, guy got like 80 some $1 million. Then he makes a move like this, and then he is getting a vote for a new stadium. I mean, the guy's not dumb. And I kind of like trust David Sampson on that this is pretty much what teams have done. The Pirates did it prior to PNC Park. Um, if you're a White Sox fan, if Jerry Reinsdorf wants to build his monument wherever it's going in the West Loop, or I don't even know what it is, someplace there. I should know.
It's South
my
Loop.
wife's
It's in the South Loop. It's in the South
because
Loop.
my wife's from there.
It's in a crappy neighborhood in the South Loop. It's the ultimate gentrification. Like all of a sudden they're going to go in there in this empty, dirty,
So
terrible lot area and build their own neighborhood.
so
And they're
who's
calling
who's
it
their
the
young
78th
kid?
because it'd be the 78th neighborhood in Chicago. They're going to literally build a neighborhood where there's nothing but railroad tracks and crime. And lots of needles probably laying in the grass. Like that's where they're going to build this thing.
So if you're close in Montgomery, you're hoping you make it to the bigs this
Yeah,
year.
you
I'm
want to be Bobby
guessing,
Witt Jr.
and you want
Yeah,
to be Bobby Witt Jr. and get
right.
that big deal, and then the White Sox
Under
will
your
build a
theory,
new
that's what you
ballpark.
want to be. Yeah,
Yeah.
under your theory, that's what you want to be. You want to be Colson Montgomery right now, their big prospect who's going to be coming up.
If you ever see me out and about in Pittsburgh, you will always recognize me, and not just because of the white beard, but also because of the Y that is always on top of my head, the hat I always wear. The Yins brand, proud partners with Bucs in the Basement. 3 dynasties, 1 brand, Yins. Finally, 1 brand to rep all black and gold. Follow at Shop Yins for new merch drops and giveaways. Order online at www.shopyins, the emphasis on the 2 Z's, high quality comfort, lightweight materials, a new modern look for the black and gold, made for Yins by a Yinzer.
By the way, did you see my fantasy baseball trade that I made this during?
Did you got the Otani deal done? Didn't you?
I've been working on my
after our
fantasy
winter
team.
meetings. After our winter
Yeah,
meetings.
but during the winter meetings, the move that I made was to flip a high-end catcher in Francisco Alvarez for Jason Dominguez. But what I did in that prospect flip is I moved up 5 spaces in our fantasy draft. You have the number 1 overall pick, and I have now moved up to the number 2 overall pick. You're taking Yamamoto, and Paul Skeens is coming to my team because I am hyped on him right now. I really am. I'm hyped on him. I know he's going to break my heart. But I am hyped for him. I'm hyped for what the Pirates have. And I'm hyped for what this team is. It's on the cusp, I think, of something big. I wish the owner would open up his wallet just a little bit more. I'd love to see a couple more signings here before spring training. I'm hoping that when the music stops and some of these players don't have chairs, they look over at the Jolly Roger and they say, yes, this is where I want to go. Because I'm hyped for Paul Skeens. I look at this rotation and I say to myself, ooh, it's going to look good. If he comes out ready to go, it's going to look good when he comes showing up in June, right? Or July, and finally walks onto this team. And I'm betting on that long term on my fantasy team making the move that I made because I have become like I'm taking him over Wyatt Langford, who's got all of that. Like right now, that'd be the other guy I'd be grabbing because it's a dynasty league, so you're looking for that young big talent that's coming out, and that guy's hyped like crazy. I see Juan Soto comparisons for him. And I'm going Skeens. I moved up in the draft just to get Skeens. And so that probably means he's going to blow out his arm in a week. And if he does, it's my fault. It's my fault, Pirates fans, if that happens.
Yeah,
because that's how much I believe in him. Right
they'll be coming to your house with the pitchforks and everything
right.
and the torches. They won't be going to Bob Nutting anymore. They'll be coming for Chris.
They'll be coming to me because I believed in him so much that I made that deal.
Yeah.
All right.
I'm
Meanwhile, who's going to be receiving pitches from him when he gets up here? Do you think it's going to be Gary Sanchez? I find it interesting that like when I read reports, it's Gary Sanchez has interest from 4 or 5 teams, but they always mention the Pirates and they really don't mention anybody else, which makes you wonder why the Pirates are being talked about so much. And I also found it interesting during our fantasy baseball draft that there was a trade made by you in which you dumped Henry Davis because you're like, I don't know if he's ever going to be a catcher.
Oh, no, no, I grabbed Henry
Oh,
Davis.
you grabbed Henry Davis. The other guy thought he was never going to be a catcher, and he didn't believe it. You went out and got Henry Davis in a trade this weekend in your fantasy league, so you're a Henry Davis believer. Did you grab him because you think he's a catcher, and do you still think he's a catcher if Gary Sanchez signs for like a 3-year deal?
Well, for my big thing is that I've always believed in Henry Davis's bat. I think his bat will develop. So as far as our dynasty league goes, we don't get any points for the defensive run saved or blocking or
Right.
framing or anything like that.
But you want
So
him to get like 10 games in at catcher a year so you can use him as a catcher.
yeah, I want to basically be able to fill my catcher, position with that. So I mean, what's he have to do? Like play like 5 games or something or 10 games, like you said,
Five in
and
season,
I can use
five.
it.
I think it's 5 in season, but it's got to be 20 from the season before. So you just like him to get 20 games in, so you don't have to wait for him to get 5 in season because that could take forever. So you want him to just get 20 games a year at catcher, and then going into the next year he's your catcher. And
Yeah,
I
and
think
I
I think that he's a very intriguing backup catcher option. We talked about this. We talked about
yeah.
the idea that having flexibility of moving a guy in from the outfield to play catcher every once in a while. I just don't know if the Pirates are going to go ahead with that plan. It is kind of a revolutionary thing. You do see some teams do it in the short term. I mean, we've talked about MJ Melendez out with the Royals and how he was an outfielder. You could talk about Wilson Contreras, who was an outfielder for the Braves for a while and then eventually moved. He got himself used to being a catcher, and now he's a highly ranked young catcher that was acquired via trade. And I want to say the Brewers have him now, and that guy, like, he's a legit top 10 catcher maybe in baseball. And at first, they didn't even want to put him behind the plate.
Yeah, and Chris, I mean, we've talked about Henry Davis. I feel like ad nauseum here, but the two things that like kind of come out to me is, I mean, we talked about whether or not like the pitch framing and different stuff like that. I mean, some of it is still going to matter, but if you get the automated balls and strikes, it coming in uh, sooner rather than later, then who knows what that means. The other piece is that, I mean, we've also talked about, he went from catching two innings in the major leagues last year. Is that even going to equate to, him splitting time between him and Jason DeLay? And do you really want, I mean, as much as I love Jason DeLay, they love him defensively, offensively, he's not great. Do you want them splitting time and each catching, 80 games a year? Or would you want to have, more of the, Gary Sanchez is your starter, Henry Davis is your backup, and, you know, Jason DeLay, who kind of seems to be like a guy that he's like one of those BABIP like darlings where no matter what he hits, it finds grass somewhere. So as a pinch hitter and somebody's personal catcher, I don't know. But I mean, the biggest thing is that the Andy Rodriguez injury just kind of threw this whole thing for a loop. We wouldn't even be having this discussion. But even at that point in time, with him there, they were still talking about, even prior to the injury, talking about Henry Davis catching. So I still think they were going to carry three catchers. If you can upgrade the offense at catcher, hopefully Henry hits. We know that Gary Sanchez can hit, because even when he has down years, um, even last year where he kind of bounced around.
Well, he's a low average guy, but he's going to have an OPS over league average generally.
Yeah.
Like, what was his OPS plus last year? 116. Except for the couple games that he had with the Mets that brought him down to 113. But basically with the Padres the whole year, he's at 116 on his OPS plus. He's had other years where he's above it. He had actually had a couple slow years towards his end of time in New York and his 1 year that he had in Minnesota, and then he kind of had a resurgence last year. The problem is he's a guy who's going to hit in the low 200s, and that's gross and it's frustrating, and I hate it. I really do. And he's only going to hit about 15 to 20 home runs. So a guy that's hitting close to, close to 200, about 210 to 220, with about 15 to 20 home runs. But his OPS gets him close to the 800 level because he's hitting a lot of extra base hits. He's walking a lot. Like his on base percentage, all that stuff coming in the play. Like he's gonna be a frustrating player for you. You're gonna see a lot of 0 for 4 days. And then you're going to see him come up and hit a bomb in a big moment. And you're going to be like, I love Gary Sanchez. Like, he is a frustrating catcher. So I wouldn't want him around long term. And so I wonder if that's what the hangup is. Because you would think the Pirates really don't want him around for long, right? Like, they'd love to have him on a 1 year deal with a 1 year option, a team option.
Yeah, and I think that's what a lot of the things are because I mean I did see and I have heard um, obviously with him and I've heard Michael A. Taylor both that the offers they are receiving are lower than what they want and obviously because if they were what they would want they both would have signed at this point in time so that's kind of like one of those things where I feel like some people are putting stuff out there that can just become true just because it's reading the tea leaves if they were getting what they wanted and with him having signed I believe it was a minor league deal last year getting DFA'd twice prior to attaching himself to the Padres and having a fairly positive year for himself both offensively and defensively. The big knock on him has always been his blocking. He's a pretty good, pitch framer, which is something that the Pirates enjoy. He's a game caller. His pop time's good. His arm is good. He is getting up there in age, so I don't know if you would want him catching, full time. So I would see him, like I said, it would almost be like I don't know, a 40-40-20 split. But then where does Henry Davis, play the rest of the time? I mean, some of that's going to be at DH, but you brought back McCutcheon. Do you really
I
want
don't
to
think
put him
Kutch
in?
makes it through the year on this team. I'm
Yeah, and we
sorry.
talked about that.
I
Yeah.
don't think Kutch makes it through the year on this team. I think Kutch is a player coach halfway through it, or he's like, he gets a ceremony halfway through the year, sending him off into the twilight. I just don't see him having the sustainability to perform at a high enough level to have an everyday job on the team. He either becomes a guy who's like the 26th man on this team while the younger guys are taking his thing, or he's retiring midseason or being DFA'd. I just don't see how he gets through the whole year.
Yeah, and the
If
other
he
part
gets
that
through the whole year, it's more than likely that too many people failed at taking his job than him performing at a high enough level to deserve it. It'd be more because nobody took it, and that would be disappointing.
yeah, and the thing for me, like just with them, is that if you say you do that 40-40-20 and you get Gary Sanchez on, I don't know, like a $5 million for this year or somewhere around there, then you're basically spending less than $7 million and hoping that you can produce adequately defensively and you get some offense from that position and you're doing what we've kind of talked about with Ben Charrington is looking for like each position as needing certain amount of wins from each position and how much you're going to pay for it. I think bringing Gary Sanchez in improves the team. I mean, it's the same thing
Yeah,
as like
no, I think they should have him.
Aroldis Chapman coming. Yeah, yeah. So I mean, it's like if you can add him, and looking at this right now, I mean, Chris, as we're recording, it's 8 days until pitchers and catchers report. When people hear this,
You still
it's
need
going to be
another pitcher
one
too.
week. You still need the other pitchers,
Yeah,
but I mean, I we talked last week. I said number one for me was starting pitcher. Number two was in between second base and outfield, but I would lean more towards second base. But I was more worried about a catcher. So for me, like this one definitely makes sense. And I still think that if it isn't Gary Sanchez, I think it will be somebody. Um, it's just we talked last week. There isn't a ton out there, and Gary Sanchez isn't like the quote unquote answer. He's the can we bridge him until we figure out kind of what Henry Davis is, and then until maybe Andy Rodriguez comes back. But that's not even guaranteeing that Andy Rodriguez is going to be a catcher at that point in time because he had Tommy John surgery and he's played
right,
first base before.
right.
So I mean, I think that this would upgrade the team. It would not put so much pressure on Henry that, I mean, obviously Henry will say, I'll take it because that's just, he's a workhorse. He would do that. But I would rather ease him into this instead of saying, okay, you got to catch 2 innings in the major leagues last year. Now you're going to catch 80 games. That just really doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah, I want to see one more pitcher in that rotation. I want to see Keller, Perez, Gonzalez, that other pitcher, and then the 5th spot can be a competition. Ortiz, Falter, Quinn Priester, maybe. I mean, like, whoever Skeens shows up, even though I don't think he starts. But have a reasonable pitching staff when you enter this season because you should be contending this year. And I think that you're one starting pitcher short. And it'd be nice to add this catcher because you want to have a professional catcher. And that right there, I think, makes me start feeling like this is a team that's going to compete, right? Like, it'd be great if they added the outfielder too, right? But I mean, they've got maybe they just don't have the room. And maybe if they're going to put Henry Davis in the outfield, or they're going to move him to DH and have Kutch move there, whatever they're going to do, they're going to move guys around. Maybe they don't add that, right? But I definitely want to see another pitcher. I'd like to see Gary Sanchez. I'd start to feel like, okay, you've had an off season now. You've had an off season that makes me see that, okay, you probably can't spend the money that you should be spending because the owner's cheap, but you've at least set yourself up to go win something. Speaking of winning, before we get out of here, PECOTA projections, where do they have the Pirates at?
They have the Pirates at 73 and 89, finishing.
And what place does that put them?
That puts them in last place in the Central, approximately 5 or 6 games behind the Brewers and the Reds.
Okay,
with St. Louis winning the division.
I don't believe the PECOTA projections. Okay, I don't believe in them because there's a range, right, in the PECOTA projections. So what's the range? What's the high end that they could get? Can you see that on there? Take a quick gander. I want to make a point here. Okay, it's like a big graph, and it kind of shows like what's most likely to happen. But then there's like then it's like, but it could be this, and it could be this. And in reality, what they do, PECOTA will give you like a 20-game spread, right?
Yeah.
So like what do they have them at as their actual projection?
The actual projection is 73.
Right. So I bet you that they spread that too. It could be as high as 85.
Right now, it definitely looks like that it could be as high as you're right on at 85.
Yeah, right, because that's how PECOTA does their thing. It's a generalized prediction model that is set up in such a way that at the end of the year, if they're wrong, they can say, well, technically we were right. It was inside that big giant range. I mean, I could do that right now. Lanuti projections have the Pirates at 77 wins, give or take 20 in either direction. Yeah, I'm guaranteed to be right. That's my Lanuti projections. That's what the Lanuti projection model has it as. Lanuti projection model has it at 77 wins, give or take 20.
And I think most models would show it within that, because even if you go to Vegas,
most models would give everybody that. Everybody's in that range except for the Dodgers.